Hey everybody and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be walking through something I did not think I was going to be doing, especially this soon, and that is explaining why I'm getting rid of the Lenovo Legion Go after my first day with it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So first and foremost, I'm not saying that this is a terrible device, nor am I saying that this is something you should not get. Just going to give you my overview, having used the device for a little while now. So a little bit of background, I do have experience building computers, working heavily with Windows, and even trying to customize various software products. You can check out my channel for the types of things that I've actually done. So just to give you some context, this isn't coming from someone that's new to the Windows platform. Now, going into the video itself, I'm going to cover pros first and then the cons. So the pros are the standard or standards that this has set for the mobile gaming market. You can look up the specs on your own end and determine where this falls, but the refresh rate, the screen, the just general hardware like controllers and things of that nature. When I say hardware, I'm more so speaking about the external components of the device that are so different. When it comes to RAM, storage space, really just any kind of internal components, those can be upgraded pretty easily. Not necessarily by you, but by companies when they release the second edition, the third edition, etc. But things like the external components, like the peripherals, like these, what I would loosely call the Joy-Cons using the Nintendo terminology, these removable controllers and just ability to actually detach them, use them like a mouse, and all of the different buttons and the layout, that is something that can't be easily imitated or done. That takes extensive testing. So the pros for me are just the standard that this has set in the mobile gaming market. Now, jumping into the cons. The first one is software in general. Now, a lot of people cover this, and I've seen a lot of different people give pushback in comments saying, well, you're getting something that has Windows, you want it for the customization, and I totally understand that. I don't necessarily have concerns with that. Mine is more so with the fact that it doesn't really feel like any of the software currently is just paired to this device specifically. So an example, and there's quite a few out there, but you'll see that there are tons of different patches, so I thought it was a good time to go ahead and purchase this device. Now, I have a separate video, which I'll link in the description, to setting up the actual dead zones and things of that nature using various programs. Now, in this case, what we will do, just to kind of show what I'm referring to, I've had one minor or a couple of issues with the games themselves. So what I can do is I can go ahead and jump into Destiny 2, and while it loads, I'll give you kind of like a brief overview of the issues that I'm talking about. So when it comes to software, there is an element using the various programs like Steam to set up and adjust the controller configurations and dead zones and things of that nature. So jumping into Steam and loading up Destiny 2, I'll show you what I mean, but the dead zones you can set up for the Steam account and general controller, as well as the controller for each game. I have dropped the dead zones and related settings to 0, but I'm still having a bit of an issue with those dead zones in these programs. Now, when you're testing, you can see that these analog sticks are actually incredibly sensitive, so it's not like the analog sticks aren't registering up until a certain point. The issue is actually that they aren't really just loading in specific games and functioning as expected. So I'll give you a general idea if I were to jump into a game, and I'll kind of load while I'm talking, but the first issue in general is just the fact that you have to go through so much effort to get things to play the way that they just should. So, for example, those dead zones are an issue in quite a few different forums, and by the time you're watching this video, this could be completely fixed. I've read that there are going to be some patches in the future for it, but coming into this, this is still newer to the market, but it is a little bit frustrating that I've had to go through so much effort just to get different games set up. And even in the case of Destiny 2, for example, I've noticed that all the settings that I've implemented still don't work. And other people actually recommend purchasing separate third-party programs until patches are released. I don't think it's a good practice to need to download something to fix an issue that should have come up during initial product testing. So I'll leave that at that while this game is loading, and I will jump into A couple of other things that I don't like. Now, next up is something that most people that use Windows heavily, which I do myself, have probably experienced, and that is simply dealing with any kind of crashes when installing programs. My first time around installing Call of Duty, for example, it ended up crashing, and I am probably going to have to uninstall and reinstall, again, assuming I actually kept the device. I've tried opening it multiple times and it would crash, and then it gives me errors related to outdated display drivers, even though I've already gone and updated those. So that process is already kind of painful in and of itself, and just not as simple as upgrading my gaming PC. When I upgraded the graphics card in my gaming PC to a newer RTX card, the update and all of that was just seamless, and all of the games worked without any issues. The painful thing about this when it comes to software is these don't have upgradable components. You're not going to be taking out a GPU and upgrading it down the road. So you should have an out of the box solution that at least works for most games right then and there for, let's just say, average settings. If you want to bump things up and push this thing to its limits, that's completely different. But what I don't like is out of the box installing a couple of games and just trying to play, having dead zones, games crashing, having to uninstall, reinstall, dealing with all of these drivers. It's just kind of a pain out of the box. I understand that it is a Windows 11 device and there's some customization to it, but I do think that there should be some respect for the fact that it is a handheld gaming device. They put Legion Space on here, so it's booting straight into a game launcher, but that doesn't show that it's being treated like a gaming device. So that's second issue. Now, while I'm loaded up here, I'm just going to show the dead zone issue that I was referring to. So you'll see if I pull over hard, the cursor is moving left and right, but you'll see that I can actually push quite a bit. Like I'm leaning the thumbstick right now, and it's not moving at all. And this is after I've already set up the generic and game-specific controller settings to reduce dead zones. So you can see I'm moving it quite a noticeable bit, and it's barely registering, if anything. So I'm holding it right now. When I stop, again, it's a pretty massive dead zone. And that's a problem when you're playing first-person shooter because it means that you are limited to jerking left and right. So I'm not a huge fan of that. And then the last two things that are kind of leading me to kind of consider or just get rid of this, first and foremost is battery, which I know a lot of people will complain about. This thing can play pretty much any game you throw at it, so it's expected not to have great battery life. But with a gaming handheld, one thing to consider is you don't want to be tied to an electric outlet. So I'm probably getting between, I would say, 1.5 to 2 hours on average on this thing, which isn't bad. But again, at that point, with this the general size and the need for an external battery bank, I might as well get a gaming laptop that's very small. And when we're talking about that hardware component, the other thing to note is the controllers themselves. I'm not a huge fan of the button placement. I know that with the right-handed controller that you're expected to be able to take it off and use it as a mouse, which I think is really, really cool. But I found myself constantly bumping into these buttons that rest right up against my palm. Now, I consider myself to have average hands, so this does fit neatly, and I don't feel like it's too heavy. But when using this device, all in all, it just feels like there's so much trouble just to get it started. I think I would consider keeping this device if, when turning it on and starting it up for the first time, I could just launch into a couple of games to experience that awe factor and say, wow, this is an incredible device, and then customize from there. I would like to have kind of like default profiles to be able to launch into and just play a game at medium settings with all of the controllers set up with just kind of a default layout and be able to adjust everything from there. But in this case, I have to update all the drivers, go through all of these different processes just to make sure that things are working as expected, and I'm still experiencing crashes. Speaking of crashes, I'm going to jump into a video that I recorded walking through the installation of a game, and then I will cover my last con, and you're going to want to stay tuned for that. So let's jump into this quick clip. All right, so just giving a quick overview of one of the issues I've already started to experience with the Legion Go. So you'll see we have the desktop here. Everything's working as expected as far as being able to actually kind of create the select window, and then you'll see all of a sudden it looks like it's either restarting, not quite sure, and then we have the task manager opening up. So I was originally trying to launch one of the Call of Duty games, and then I had an issue with verifying some of the installed components, and then I was trying to also run an updater, and as you can see, had some issues. So if I try to cancel out of this, we now have the task manager, we can try to cancel out of that. But basically, long story short, things just aren't responding for me right now. All right, so now that we're done with that, I'm going to cover the last concern or issue that I have with this product, and that is just Legion space. So what I mentioned earlier is one of the concerns that I have with this device, and that is just software in general. Now, the last thing is going to be the software itself. So currently this thing, from what I've read, does not have VRR, which I've seen a lot of people on the fence about. Maybe some people love it, some people don't, whether or not that's an issue. But from the time of filming, I don't believe that's something that currently exists for this. Whether that could be updated and added in, I don't know. But that is one thing. And the second thing is just the actual software itself. Now, I know you can get your own launchers and things of that nature, but for a device that costs close to $800, you would expect to launch into a really, really nice ecosystem. Instead, it feels like they took a shortcut, threw Windows 11 on it, gave us this launcher that doesn't really do much, and then forced you to open that launcher every time, but then didn't give you a good gaming experience. So, a couple of examples. Going into this launcher, if you're in the homepage of the launcher and you decide, you know what, I want to go to my settings, I have some graphics drivers that are outdated. How do I update that? Well, you're not going to find anything in here to help you with that. So it launches you into something that doesn't even get you started with using the device. Next up, you may be thinking, okay, what about my controller? I need to set up the dead zones. I know that that's an issue. You can test your input and do some controller updates and firmware updates, but currently I don't have any updates and I'm still having issues with the mapping for my device. So you can't even really set up or access a ton of useful bits of information to help setting up these controllers and things of that nature. So I don't like that either. I have to go to the game specifically, which means I'm relying on the game manufacturers to build in software to help with that. And then again, with this program, it has stuff that's already really taken care of in Windows. So if I go to General, if I turn off the boot into Legion Space, you'll see, okay, so I have performance and I have these two options. And then I'm pretty sure the bottom one is actually just the Windows default. You do have the ability to update some. Now, you do have the ability to update the network and Bluetooth, but that's already in the operating system. You can adjust voice and display, which should already be in the operating system as well. So all this really does is give you access to a lot of functionality that's already adjustable in Windows 11. So I guess my final point to kind of wrap this video up is my biggest concern is I think that this should have a more seamless interface to drop into. When I get a device like this for the first time, I want to test it out before I start adjusting settings. I want to be able to boot straight in, have everything update, and then be able to download a game or two and play it just to get excited, instead of getting frustrated by downloading my first game and seeing, okay, you know what, there's some dead zones I need to fix. Then downloading another game and realizing I need to fix that on every single game. Or having downloads crash, need to repair them, reinstall, re-update, then download drivers. I guess the point is just, it doesn't feel like everything is there yet, and I don't know if or when that will happen, which is what's prompting me to swap this out and really just get rid of the handheld device in general. With that being said, I would love to know your thoughts. So let me know, is this a device you're interested in? Is there something else you want to learn about it? Let me know in the comment box below, and I'll see you all in the next video.